Welcome everybody today. I have the pleasure of being joined by Veronika here. Veronika is a community manager with Quai Network, and today we are continuing our series Crypto Around the World. So Veronika is originally from Russia, and she went to school in Europe, and
Yeah.
she is now working here at Quai Network in the U.S. So we are going to be discussing today some of the money problems that Russians are experiencing with sanctions that started all the way back in 2014 with the invasion of Crimea, all the way up through present day with the war in Ukraine, and sort of how they get along with the traditional money system and some of the issues they have, as well as what crypto does to play a role and help them facilitate the economy and payments. So with that, maybe if you want to give an introduction to yourself and a little bit of your history in crypto and kind of how you got here.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Russia for the first 16 years of my life. That's where I spent them. So I moved around in Russia. I was born in a tiny village, actually. So we kind of kept leveling up to a bigger and bigger city over time. And when I was 16, I just finished grade 9, which is considered like the basic education of Russia. You can go to grade 11 or you can finish at grade 9. And I realized, and my dad had the opportunity, luckily, to send me abroad to study. So I went to boarding school in the UK for 3 years,
Okay.
and I wanted to stay there for a bit longer, but then also wanted to explore further. And it was also much cheaper to go somewhere else. So I went to the Netherlands to study for my university degree, and I got my bachelor degree in the University of Amsterdam. And now I'm here on the internship at Quai Network. I mean, Dominant Strategies, that's building Quai Network.
Oh, very good. So, I kind of alluded to Russia kind of really starting to have frictions emerge on the
Yeah.
international stage and the money system in 2014. So in 2014, for everyone who's a little spotty on history, Russia annexed Crimea, which was part of Ukraine that bordered on the Black Sea, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And it was how the Russian military has access to that maritime waterway.
Mm-hmm.
So I think strategically, Crimea is obviously a very important place.
Mm-hmm.
And with Ukraine and Eastern Ukraine, there definitely is some overlap in Russian heritage and
Yeah.
potential claims. Obviously, from a Western perspective, Crimea was part of Ukraine, and Russia said, "Well, we're gonna have this vote," and I don't know the fairness of the referendum, but I believe it was voted on in Crimea, and they decided to join Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And it was effectively annexed, and that's really what started the sort of conflict with sanctions sort of becoming emergent in the Western financial system on Russians. So at that point in time, like, were you guys influenced by those sanctions, or how did that affect Russians and the Russian economy?
Yeah, so the regular people were not as affected. I was very young at the time, so I personally was not affected at all. But I wouldn't say my family felt it because we were not the oligarchs. We were not in kind of big government companies. There were like some sanctions that were related to those, but in general, from 2014 until 2022, the regular person would not really, unless you were into history and you knew about it, you could survive and live in Russia without being worried about it.
Were there any restrictions on travel or visas at that point in time, or no?
No, so you could also travel to Crimea, which became, I guess, easier. But there are some restrictions on the people who are in Crimea. So many things cannot operate in Crimea. And as the sanctions themselves were not particularly to Russia, but to Crimea. So there it became very difficult because on one hand, like, why are you making the lives of the people who are already there difficult? But it also made it kind of a place where people went to for vacation. And it's like a very, dividing topic, because even within Russia, some people would not agree with it, and they are like, why would you even go there for a vacation? This is like horrendous. This is not even our territory. So it's like, as a protest, they wouldn't go there. But some people like don't care. They would just go to Crimea and just chill out there. They don't care whether it's Russia, Ukraine. It's Russia now, I guess, to them.
Right. So it didn't really get affected until 22, you mentioned. So 22 was the invasion of Ukraine.
Yes.
Tell me about what kind of happened after that started.
Yeah, so 24th of February, I think, every day. That's the day that every Russian remembers at this point. I was in the Netherlands at the time, and when I heard the news, it was exactly on the day. I was very shocked. I was very scared. And there were like rumors right before that something may be happening, that Russia was like showing off their tanks right on the border. And the media were like saying like maybe we're bluffing again because something like this has happened before. And I was like, personally, I was very shocked, and I was a little bit faded out, just in general, trying to understand what's going on, because I was scared for my family. When this happens, you start thinking many more steps ahead, and you imagine the domino and how it's all is going to like be bad for everybody in every country. But then, like, it kind of faded. So once the emotions got away, and you're like, I cannot even remember it very well. So once the emotions kind of faded out and you started seeing the reaction of the world to it, and everybody kept like saying that Russia was a terrorist state, Russia was so bad, and people still do. And I tried to understand whether what are we doing, why are we doing that. And they're like, the media in Russia, most of it is the one that's on TV. It's propaganda. Yes, it's state media, but there are a lot of YouTube channels, and YouTube is still free and available in Russia. I mean, at least for now. They started slowing it down, but it's still going. So I tried to get my news from all the sources, but I could still not understand. I still couldn't understand what was going on. But then the sanctions started going on. So all the European countries, all the other countries, I mean, away from Europe, America especially, started sanctioning Russia in any way possible. Like, they started with some like obvious sanctions that they could introduce, and it kept coming and coming and coming and coming, to the point where you just were pretty much cut off from the rest of the world. But you could still kind of find your ways, I guess, to some extent.
So when did you kind of discover crypto? In this timeline, were you aware of it before 22? Were you involved? Were you using it at all?
I personally got into crypto in about 2021, sorry. So it was January. And I was always into making videos. Like, I made my first video when I was 12. And all this time, I just wanted to make videos about something. I had a bunch of random YouTube channels that I made like sketches or something like that. And I was just sitting around, and my brother comes in, and he's like, there are these ambassador programs that the projects are launching. So you can basically make videos or articles for them, and they could possibly reward you some money in the future. I was like, okay. If you tell a teenager in Russia that they can make money, they're like going to be all ears. Okay. So right now, I think especially teenagers are very much into crypto. So it was that time when I got in, because I wanted to start making videos. And I was making basically video as I learned about crypto. I learned about the project, I learned about technology. I make a video for a YouTube channel that I started. So I kind of got to know the ecosystem a little bit, but I was not much of a user of it. So I could talk about it, I learned about it, but I never really needed to use it in Russia. Within Russia, to like pay for anything, or I didn't really have friends abroad. I mean, that I had to pay in crypto.
Right. So speak to Russia then. In Russia, kind of what is the current, or what was the system maybe that sort of existed prior to 22? are most transactions in cash or most card, or people
Mm-hmm.
using like a Venmo type app? How do people kind of get along sort of day to
Yeah.
day in Russia?
I mean, it was pretty Western, at least in my part. I lived in the European part in a pretty big city. And like you can use your Visa, you can use your MasterCard. The banks had more or less good relationships with the overseas banks. You could buy foreign stocks via a Russian exchange, though. So it would be the exchange that has the relations with some foreign exchanges or whatnot. And you can use the Russian exchange to participate in the foreign economy. You can easily buy foreign currencies if you'd like. We started getting investment opportunities, more and more of them. Like there were like apps being popularized for younger people that investing is like a good way to preserve your wealth kind of thing. So overall, like Russia was a part of the global ecosystem, and we just used not credit cards like you do in America. It's very rare that people use credit cards. We use debit cards mostly, and that's the majority. Then some people also use these applications. So there was one that was popular that was called Kiwi. Kiwi was like just similar to Venmo. You have in America, and it was just, for example, I used it to pay for an online game. So I wanted to try to buy some in-game assets. So I used Kiwi to put the money into the game, and there was like let's say terminal somewhere, and I could use cash to put into the terminal, and that would go into my Kiwi, and then I could use it somewhere. But cash was slowly like losing popularity over time, and everybody just goes and uses cards.
Would you say that the cash usage is similar to America, or
Maybe
less or more? Where'd you put it?
I would say very similar. Personally, when I just came to America, like I sometimes had to use cash because I didn't have the American bank card. In Russia, really depends, I think, on the place also where you're at. In the cities, I would say they're just like in America, the majority relies on cards. But I didn't notice much difference.
Okay. So speak to you were when the Ukraine situation took place. You were at school in
The
the
Netherlands,
Netherlands.
yes.
Kind of what effect did that have on you besides sort of the shock and the
Yeah.
political effect and concerns, just from a monetary perspective? Kind of what happened then?
Yeah, that's, I guess, a very important point that I didn't really mention because, at that point, obviously tuition is expensive, and my dad used to send me just money via Swift, so you can just send from a Russian bank to a Dutch bank, and they took their fees, which are ridiculous, but they were not like, it was still possible and it was still fine. And at that point, it was once they said that Swift is no longer going on, it already started being like a bit difficult to send money around that time when the rumors started about it that Swift might be forbidden. So once the plug was pulled, my dad could no longer send me money to my Dutch bank account. So I had to quickly find a job. And gladly I found my work here to like pay for my own tuition, pay for my rent, pay for food and everything. I got like, I don't know exactly how other people did it. I know there were some ways that they tried to get money from their parents via other banks. So there were a couple of banks that still maintained this kind of maybe branches. I believe they had branches outside, so they kind of were an international bank-like thing. But they are much more restricted right now. And once SWIFT was forbidden, basically, and sanctioned, the fees became even harsher. It was more and more difficult. It was taking longer and longer. And I think, like, if you think right now, it is like twice as difficult. So it is like, I don't even know the way to send money to Europe from Russia now.
So what happened with kind of like assets that were held by Russians abroad?
Yeah.
When sanctions took place.
So not only did they kind of forbid the transfers from Russia to the foreign bank accounts, They also basically froze anything that we had in frozen assets. So if you had a bank card, so the oligarchs had their assets seized and whatever because they were personally sanctioned. But as I said, we're not oligarchs, we're not in the government. But still, because the sanctions sanctioned Russian banks, the Russian banks had assets in outside of Russia that allowed us to participate in these foreign exchange markets. So whatever my dad had in stocks with foreign stocks, it basically got frozen. He says it's lost. I have a tiny bit of hope that it's not lost, but in all fairness, it was quite a bit that we lost. And if you try to maybe estimate it, it's maybe obviously you wouldn't put in stocks what you really need right now. So it's maybe 1 to 2 years of average person's salary that just disappeared.
Gone. Yeah. Wow. So circling back to today then, you've managed to get visa to the United States, and you're working here with Quai, so you're making money in US dollars, and your expenses are in US dollars. So maybe you don't have quite the number of headaches that you've had in the past, but you certainly have friends. And you mentioned too, when the sanctions happened, you had a Spotify subscription.
Yeah.
And you could keep paying for your Spotify subscription.
Exactly.
So how did you deal with keeping your Spotify subscription once your cards had turned off?
I was in the Netherlands at the time, and it was about a year into this whole thing. And I used to use my Russian subscription because, in all fairness, it is cheaper. It's $1 for a Russian subscription versus several dollars, $5 or maybe more for the Dutch one. And also, some of my Russian friends also lost their access. And because I had the Dutch card, I had to just pay more money. So I was lucky in that regard that I had the access to a foreign bank account. So that's what I did. And I set up a family subscription, and I got all my friends into this family subscription, so they still have access to Spotify. But overall, it's not the only thing. Many brands left Russia, and I think that were big news. McDonald's left Russia, but instead of McDonald's, we basically have our own Vkusna i Tochka, which basically means delicious. Period.
But it's the same menu.
Yeah, it's a menu. I mean, they slightly changed the namings, but it's it's kind of a Big Mac, but it's not exactly a Big Mac. So they removed the Mac and they replaced it with some other word.
Okay.
And,
but there's still 2 patties.
Yes.
Bun in the middle.
It looks
special sauce.
Yeah. Some people say it's more delicious. Some people say it's worse. I guess it's more or less the same.
Okay, fair enough. So then that kind of brings us to crypto then.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you don't have this issue, but you have friends, and your friends potentially still have this issue if they want to travel abroad.
Oh, yeah.
If they're studying abroad. Are people using crypto kind of as a rail to deal with some of these problems?
Yeah, that's true. That's the actual fact, because I have my personal experience with that. So my brother, he was able to visit me in the Netherlands. So his visa was still active, luckily. But right now, it's still possible, but it's very difficult to get a visa. And while his visa was still active, he was like, okay, let me just get the opportunity to visit you. And he came to me, it was maybe around April 2023. So he came to the Netherlands. His Russian card did not work anywhere. He could not pay for anything. So what we did, I paid for him everywhere with my Dutch card. And then he could pay me back in USDT to my exchange. So he paid with his crypto because he has crypto. He paid it because you can basically find a way to put Russian money into crypto and then buy dollars that way.
How does that work?
So there
there
are exchanges. So there used to be Binance and OKX and other stuff, the ones you have popular elsewhere. I think Binance no longer works here in Russia, I mean. But what they did, they launched an exchange that was kind of from Binance, but it was not Binance at all. I think
It's like a subsidiary or something.
CoinMex or something like that.
Okay.
So it was basic. I don't exactly remember the name. Maybe I got it wrong. But the idea was when you got into Binance Russia, it opens you a huge window that, we cannot send, you cannot, it's no longer going to work in the future. So, but you can use this. And everywhere there was basically an ad for this thing. And there are exchanges that people can use, centralized exchanges in Russia. They're not huge, so it's a bit of a risk. The smaller they are, the bigger the risk. Some people use P2P. We also have, the physical ATM kind of things, but they're very rare. Not in every city. I think there might be a couple in Moscow, but we had none in my city.
So that's really maybe the only generalized way to get access outside of Russia is to go through one of these exchanges and then maybe use like a USDT asset and then either spend it directly or convert it somewhere else.
Yes.
Interesting. So in terms of internal to Russia, if we look at the ruble and we look at the ruble relative to the dollar, at some point, maybe back in the 90s, rubles were 1-to-1 with the dollar. I think in 2000 it was about 10-to-1. Now it's about 100-to-1, and right after the invasion of Crimea, it went to like 140-to-1.
Yeah. So Ukraine in this.
Ukraine.
And technically,
it's not the most unstable currency outside of sort of the geopolitical shock. But overall, it still maybe loses 10% of its value to the dollar sort of every year for the past. Well, I guess. Maybe that would be 5%. Say 5 to 7% relative to the US dollar every year for the past 2 decades. Do people in Russia use, or were they using sort of dollars or crypto as a store of value relative to the ruble? Was that something that like people were doing?
So in general in Russia, I wouldn't say there are many people who don't have savings at all. So whatever savings they had, they would keep it in rubles. Some people who were a bit more advanced, they would probably use USD and use the Russian exchanges to buy USD from them. But that was not the most popular thing. They were always like, even in the USSR, like dollars were considered like a currency if you wanted to save up your money, and you could, but it was not very legal basically during the USSR times. But then once like Russia happened, you started having a bit more access to that and a bit more foreign interchange. But in general, many people just kept it in rubles, and maybe the majority just kept it in banks, I would even say, because inflation is pretty high and the rates therefore are also not too bad, but for saving, I guess, but not for taking.
So, I mean, are people using Bitcoin for that purpose or other cryptocurrency for that purpose?
It's not very popular.
Okay.
And there is not much talk of crypto as an investment in Russia. It's more of a way to earn money, I would say.
Okay.
So it's like the more novel wave of people like hunting for opportunities to earn money in crypto. And that's how I would say it's gaining the most popularity.
So you don't see internal to Russia crypto being used transactionally for settlement at all. It's more of an international mechanism and an international job mechanism is kind of.
Yes, I think that's actually, there was a piece of news recently, they announced that crypto could be used and legalized for international transactions. So it was literally like a month ago, or that when they said, internally we don't really accept it, but you can use crypto for external transactions for international trade with like for other countries or whatever.
Now, I mean, it's interesting though, right? Then how does that work? Because if you're going to use it externally, doesn't that also mean that
it's weird?
At some level, you have to use it internally. Otherwise, you don't have a balance of trade.
You shouldn't ask the government smart questions. So.
Yeah, I mean, Russia's had the sort of like an interesting relationship with crypto over the years, right? Early on, some of the most popular exchanges were actually Russian-based. BTCE, which probably predates you by a bit, but circa like 2012 timeframe to maybe, I think they probably shut down in 14 or something.
Yeah.
BTC was actually like one of the more popular exchanges.
But I'm sure there is like a lot of that comes. I am not exactly familiar with that, but it has become a bit more public how big like the drug scene is and how big the dark net is. So anything darknet related, you would have to use BTC for it. So
in Russia,
I mean, you wouldn't use rubles, right? So to buy anything on darknet. So if I know that there are some big cartels. That there was a big piece of news that there was a huge cartel in Russia, Hydrate was called, and they obviously did not use any bank stuff, so they used crypto for that. But I don't want to say that crypto is only used for that, although I'm sure there is a lot of money in it. At the moment, it's more like a way to earn and a way to interact with the rest of the world.
And the government's sort of tacitly allowing it, or explicitly allowing it at this point.
Yeah.
For international trade, you just don't want to ask them the question of how does that balance of trade work, because clearly it has to be being used domestically for that to really happen. Interesting. Okay, so in Russia, you would say people aren't really using it speculatively. People aren't using.
I mean, they do, but not as many because we don't have like free money to speculate.
Okay. So there's just it's not there's not as much excess savings to kind of put into it.
Yeah.
But those that have it maybe do it at some level. Okay, so there's that. There's no real transactional use inside the country. It's really just that mechanism for international trade and maybe finding jobs and getting paid for the international companies.
Yeah, I know there are a bunch of Russian moderators that get paid in crypto by outside. And I guess that's good. That's easy for them. The regulations are a bit weird, but I would, in all honesty, they're kind of weirded everywhere. You cannot really find a way, or unless you have a good lawyer, if you really need to make sure that you're fine. But
interesting. So, what do you think kind of the future for, crypto looks like in Russia?
I think like the sanctions kind of paved the way for it a little bit more, and like. The effect of the sanctions was that people became more tech savvy. Like we were forbidden to use Facebook and Instagram, but we can all use a VPN now. So I guess what's even better in the to have a population that's tech savvy. So that's also brought the popularity to crypto, and like a lot of Russians got in during the ICO times. So we tried to get in during that time, and people started earning money via ambassador programs. So that was also bringing more money and therefore more popularity. And as I mentioned before, there are more teenagers that I see that are in Russia and that are interested in crypto right now. So as they study and maybe do this kind of things, I noticed that some people do become developers. So it kind of becomes more intertwined with actual more professionalism or maybe something more meaningful. And they also recently talked about the regulations of mining. They want to like legalize it, but make it regulated so that like energy amount is regulated or like the energy sources are regulated or something like that. It's still in talks. I think there was something about the November 2024 stuff going on about that.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting when you talk about mining and mining relative to nation states. What you like actually observe is that with currencies, right, nation states kind of want to issue their currencies internally as a mechanism to sort of tax their populations, and ideally they would also like to export them and like have them used in international settlement and trade. That's one of sort of the big advantages that the U.S. has had, is because sort of being that international unit of settlement, when the U.S. government and the Federal Reserve print money, they can effectively like stealth tax the entire world and all reserves that are held worldwide, not just, the savings of the domestic population. But when you get to money, and you get to something that's like a harder form of money, you can think of things like BTC as being somewhat analogous to oil. And so from a flow of capital perspective and the strength of a currency perspective, they would almost prefer to have Bitcoin minted in Russia, use that as the exported currency rather than having to have that foreign exchange market with the rubles when they're cut off. So as long as they can sort of generate it locally and then use it externally, it actually creates a positive
It's similar
outcome.
to selling oil, basically.
It's similar to selling oil.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe that's the idea. It's like, I heard that like Trump wants to have all the Bitcoins mined in America. And I feel like Russia looks like to be on that path too. But I mean, we have a lot of oil, so...
Yeah, no, I mean, Russia... It's been a minute since I've looked at this, but I think Russia is... I mean, it's certainly top 5 in terms of energy production.
Yeah, probably. There are like some sanctions that they're trying. Like, you know, Europe was very much hurt by the sanctions on Russian oil. Right. And
well, nat gas too.
Yeah, I mean, just Russian energy, basically.
Fun aside. Talking about that, from a point of view of a Russian, what happened to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I personally have no idea. I would suspect Americans would probably do it. I do not know because I'm not deep enough into it to like actually do an investigation.
Yeah, don't be bashful. Is that the general consensus in Russia that America blew up the Nord Stream 2?
I would say there are different ones. Some would say it's Ukraine, and some would say it's like America or like whoever.
Well, maybe one of those two. I would say intelligent Americans probably conclude that America blew up the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Obviously, the media does not support that narrative. But sorry, an aside. So Russia generates a bunch of energy. Bitcoin creates this sort of like natural thing that sort of allows them to export it, which is really good for them in a sanctioned environment.
Yeah, it's kind of a new revenue stream, I guess. I mean, it would be cool because right now I feel like for the nation states, it's just an opportunity that they could seize, and there are states that see it, and there are those that don't. And if you become the first comer and the first adopter of crypto and like make clear regulations, I think like Russia can become more attractive for people too, because right now like people like whenever I tell them, oh, I'm Russian, they're like, oh, maybe I would like to visit Russia someday. Not now though. No.
Well, it's interesting when you think about proof of work. If you have a market determined outcome, not like a militarily determined outcome, the sort of natural point of equilibrium would be countries trying to use the sort of appropriate amount of resources to invest into the systems to create access to international goods and trade. If, you know, these sort of hard money decentralized systems function as that unit of settlement, every country would be interested internally in developing production of that asset. Yeah. It's kind of like the natural outcome of proof of work systems. There's questions obviously that I have about Bitcoin in terms of, you know, its scalability and its long-term sort of economic sustainability and its decentralization, but the characteristic of proof of work being something that Russia would rationally decide to try to mine, or any country would rationally decide to mine, holds for any sort of proof of work system that they think would be adopted for international settlements. So it's interesting to see Russia kind of turn to that, because they're not just turning to it from the perspective of telling their citizens that they should use crypto internationally. They're also turning to it and saying we should figure out how to produce it domestically.
But I guess the best is for those countries that have the cheapest energy. So Russia does not have too much of an expense for it. Like, I'm pretty sure the heating is already on in Russia, but in all fairness, they need it. So I think actually during the wartime, when it just started, because it felt like it was almost an attempt to show that everything is okay, so that they kept the heating for a very long time. So it was almost May and it was like going on. And it's like, it's central, so that's how it works there. But it seems to be the conditions seem to be very much conducive to crypto being used in Russia, and especially proof of work. Maybe I'm just brainwashed Russian, But like proof of work speaks to the kind of initials inside of me, maybe like the actual work, because, communism, workers and everything, like everything comes to like, I don't know, just actual tangible hard money and assets. And Russians love gold, Russians love precious metals, Mother Russia. Yeah, so jokes aside, I think in general the environment is pretty conducive for crypto in Russia, especially now.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, well, cool. I appreciate you taking the time to talk. You do have a YouTube channel,
Yes,
that you not only do Quai related stuff with, but you review other projects and crypto related technologies. Name of the channel, how people can find you?
Yeah, you can find me at Veronika Polar. That's the name of the channel, or you can just put it all together and find it like that in a search. Thank you for having me here. I was glad to spread the word about Russia a bit more and that we are not all angry big men.
Well, appreciate it, Veronika.
Thank you.
Thanks.